I would just like to say how honored I am to be here on Treaty 1 territory and the homeland of the Métis Nation. How proud I am that our Premier has found the will to ask me to take over a new department, Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations. And I want to say that I've got the utmost respect for everything that Eileen Clark has done in this office to move reconciliation forward. She has worked tirelessly to earn the respect and the trust of Indigenous people in Manitoba, and that's the next level for me, is to re-engage with everybody and earn their trust and respect in Manitoba, so we can work together and forge a better Manitoba. So.
Indigenous leaders said Ms. Clark's resignation was a big loss. She's worked really hard to build relationships. You're now stepping into a portfolio that, quite frankly, Indigenous relations across the country right now are a sensitive topic. How do you plan on continuing to build those relationships coming into a portfolio where the minister has resigned?
Well, for me, with my background in both business and in medicine, in my medical career, there are often times where I took over a case from another individual, and in business, taking over the management as well. And in those roles, I always found the most important aspect of that new position was reaching out to the outgoing individuals and to have that sit down, talk with them, and talk to them about the strengths of the department, the weaknesses, the opportunity, the threats that may be out there to us, and what do we need to do as a group, as cabinet ministers here in Manitoba now, to work together to build a bigger and stronger Manitoba for everyone.
So where do you see the
support
first
the
step?
Premier's comments last week, and if so, how do you explain those comments to the Indigenous leaders who are very angry about the comments?
When it comes to comments in the media, I think it's important for the media to all understand, or try to understand, where the comments come from. Reach out to the individuals who made them, and to report fairly both sides of what's being reported out there. With that, I would like to say that, to me, there have been very strong comments made on both sides of the arguments here. We've had very compassionate statements made by leaders out there, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, throughout Canada. And if we talk about truth and reconciliation, one of the most important aspects of truth and reconciliation to me is that truth. It's getting down to finding out what exactly is the truth out there. I know my ancestors, my European ancestors, came here in the 1600s. There were already people living here. We assimilated with the Indigenous people. I became a member of the Métis Nation through that. They worked together to build a better and stronger Canada. They did what they could. They're very Manitobans, the settlers who came, and the Indigenous people that were here are all very resilient, and they all continue to want to work together on reconciliation, which, I want to move that forward as quickly and as efficiently as we can.
But do you support the comments that the Premier made, and how do you explain those comments to the people, the Indigenous leaders who are very upset about the comments?
Well, that's what I was saying. We need to look at all the comments that are made out there from all perspectives, and with that, it's about educating. Starting in our schools, to educate individuals about the importance of knowing our culture and where we came from as Manitobans, as Canadians. And only through that process of people asking those questions. So the Premier made some statements that got a lot of people thinking. I hope that it got them thinking. To ask themselves, where does that statement come from? Where was he going with that? And to hear his explanation today, it was to acknowledge that the individuals who came here to Canada We're here to build a better Canada, to build a better Manitoba. which is where we want to be moving forward.
So what's your position on the residential schools then? Is it good intention too?
I'm sorry.
What is your position regarding the residential schools? Is it part of this good intention to build a better Canada?
Well, residential schools, I had, you know, being Indigenous, I heard the stories my entire life of the treatment of individuals in residential schools. And I think at one time in the 1900s, the federal government had actually hired a doctor to look at the situations in residential schools. His last name, I believe, was Bryce. And he did his reports and came back to the federal government and said, we have a very high death loss in our residential schools. And the reasons he pointed out were there was malnourishment in the schools, there was overcrowding in the schools, poor ventilation, TB in the schools, which accounted for a lot of problems in those residential schools, just the physical environment that the children were placed in. Would I want to see my children, my grandchildren, taken away from me and put into an institution? At the time, I believe they really did think that they were doing the right thing. In retrospect, we have to acknowledge what's happened in our past and do what we can to not only to acknowledge, but to recognize. And our government is doing more than our part with Truth and Reconciliation as calls to action. 94 calls to action through the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And Manitoba has gone above and beyond those recommendations, and we will continue to move above and beyond those recommendations made by the Commission.
Minister, for these two sides,
How you just describe residential schools, how is that not an example of newcomers and their governments attempting to destroy the lives of Indigenous people?
Well, at the time, I think the intent was there they thought they were doing the right thing. In retrospect, it's easy to judge in the past, but at the time, they really thought that they were doing the right thing. I'm saddened by the fact that it took so long for individuals to recognize that process wasn't working and it wasn't the right thing to do.
Were they trying to destroy the lives of Indigenous people and communities and their language and culture? Even if they thought it was the right thing, they thought they were doing the right thing, do you think they were trying to destroy and expunge the identities, the culture, the language of Indigenous people?
From my knowledge of it, the residential school system was designed to take Indigenous children and give them the skills and abilities they would need to fit into society as it moved forward. So,
Do you think that was the policy? Do you think that was the intention of the federal government to do that? To just give them
I am an honorary witness for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I listen to the stories of the survivors.
yes.
And I cannot accept you saying what you just said about residential schools. It was the express intent of residential schools to kill the Indian in the child. It is not cultural relativism. It is not revisionist history for us to say that that was wrong. Any right-minded person at the time should have known that it was wrong. Many did know and speak up against it. And if you are to take your job that you've been appointed to by Mr. Pallister seriously, starting today, you have to change that thing.
I look forward to working with you in the future as the leader of the opposition.
We'll give you a chance, but you can't be out here defending residential schools if you want to work with Indigenous communities. Killing the Indian in the child was wrong. That's what they talked about at the time when they were started, when they were run. We all know that that was wrong. So you have to move past that.
Okay, so what do you say to that? I mean, I'm sorry, but this is not a normal introduction to a minister.
Right.
The opposition shows up to tell you what he believes is what's what.
Yes.
I mean, we're at a climactic moment in our society here. How do you react to Mr. Kinew's interrupting your introduction?
It goes back to what I was saying about trying to get down to the truth as to different perspectives were held on both sides in history. And we, and you as reporters, need to do your jobs to get down and research as much as you can to find out what the truth was in those situations.
So
and that's part of my job.
What do you believe the truth was? Like these are softball questions.
Yeah.
What do you believe the truth is, sir?
Yeah.
You're the new minister.
With
These are
regard
softball
to
questions.
residential school, what do you believe the truth is?
What do you think the truth is?
To assimilate Indigenous people into the non-Indigenous culture.
And was that an attempt to destroy their culture?
They didn't allow them to practice any of their cultural beliefs when they were in the Indigenous schools, which it's important that we recognize that happened and do what we can to bring that culture back and to teach that in our schools today. That we need to acknowledge what happened in the past and work together to move beyond that as a team.
Last one for Minister Lagimodiere.
Sorry, Mr. Minister, I'm still not clear on whether or not you support Premier Pallister's comments from last week. It's a yes or no. Do you agree with him? I'm just not. I still haven't heard that answer. It's a pretty simple one. I'm sure you must have been prepared for this question today. It's a yes or no.
I believe that he was trying to tell everybody that everybody that came to Canada was trying to work together for a better Canada. That's truly what he believes.
At anybody's expense? You think that was at anybody's expense? Build a better Canada for newcomers coming here, but is that at the expense of Indigenous people that were living here? Do you think?
Indigenous people did suffer because of what happened in the past. There's no doubt about that. And it's up to us now to acknowledge that and recognize that truth and say, what do we as Indigenous people now expect from a government moving forward? And how can we work together with that?
So what you're saying is that the media and Indigenous leadership and a significant number of Manitobans misunderstood Premier Pallister's comments. Is that correct?
Well, I often, I have an extensive background in education. And one of the problems that you have in education is you have a professor standing in front of you and he's giving you a lecture. Now, in order for me to understand that, I've got to encode what I think that professor is saying and put it into my mind. And then to answer a question on a test, I need to go back to that vault, decode it, and put it back into what I thought that individual was trying to say. And what I'm saying is it's important for everybody to try and understand all the aspects of the statements that are made. And if you don't understand, reach out to those individuals and say, I'm not really sure what you meant here.
So a significant number of people in Manitoba and the Indigenous leadership that have criticized Mr. Pallister's comments had to decode, as you said, what he said. But I still...
For themselves.
For themselves. And I still will return to my question. You believe that those people misunderstood his comments, correct? Yes or no? They misunderstood him?
From what he said today, yes.
Thanks. That's it for Minister Lagimodiere. Can I just get a comment on how you assess the file so far? I hate to interrupt, but we haven't actually asked you about your file. There's fights over VLTs, over pod, over everything. Okay.
Thank you.